What's up, everybody? Thanks as always for supporting the show. It would mean a lot to me if you would take a second to scroll down and hit that subscribe button to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel, and then follow me on social media on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter so you guys don't miss any of our content over the course of this season. All right, let's talk some basketball. All right, moving on to our mailbag. First question. In your opinion, what has happened to Jordan Poole? Is his steep decline in overall play all about his attitude to his new situation, or his skills that much heightened by playing with Steph in the Warriors system? So, for disclaimer up front, I haven't watched a ton of Wizards basketball this year. I've only watched a couple of their games. But here's the thing, and I started to notice this last year. In the 2022 season, Jordan Poole played a very under control brand of basketball. He did occasionally take tough shots, but he was playing more within the flow of the offense. Starting last year and then extending into this year, Jordan Poole has been leaning into almost like his brand as being like this very flashy is the wrong word. I hate the negative connotations of it, but let's just call it beautiful. Like focusing on the aesthetics of basketball, right? And here's the thing, making tough shots it looks great. You know, hitting that wild spin move into that turnaround fadeaway, man, that makes for a great Instagram reel. And I'm not downplaying that. I love that beauty in the game as well. But basketball is usually more productive when it's boring. And Jordan Poole actually has a lot of the capability to play some boring basketball too. And I just think for him, it's typical young guard growth in the sense that he's kind of lost track of his priorities a little bit. And give him a couple of years and he'll figure out that he cares more about winning, because he is a champion at the end of the day. But he'll figure out that he cares more about winning and being the best basketball player he can be than he does about some of the more beauty-oriented elements of the game. And I think he'll get on track. I don't think the 2022 season was fluky. I just think it's more an indicator of inconsistency from a young guard, if that makes sense. Next question. Hey, Jason, can you please talk about the Suns' recent win streak? They've been playing through adversity and deleting huge leads that other teams have had, and doing it with high-level defensive energy and offensive brilliance. KD should be all defense this year with how much effort he's putting in. Thanks for all the great content. Reese from Perth, Australia. Reese, thank you so much for supporting the show. I sincerely appreciate it, and it's cool. It's always cool to see fans outside of the United States, especially just even beyond the support of this show. Just it's cool to see how global of a sport basketball is. It's something that I think it's underplayed when we talk about NFL versus NBA. And the NBA is a global sport. It's not even on the same playing field as the NFL in terms of its potential in the grand scheme of things. And so, Reese, thanks again for supporting the show, and shout out to Australia. My buddy Matt actually played Australian rules football out there. He was one of my groomsmen in my wedding. Played center at the University of Arizona, and went out and played AFL football out there for a little while. So the Suns. First of all, they're on my list to hit very soon. I just haven't gotten to them yet. Obviously, my vacations have thrown a giant wrench into things, but we will do a more deep dive on the Suns soon. They have a tough back-to-back on Sunday, Monday against the Orlando Magic and the Miami Heat, and we'll probably be talking a lot of Suns on Monday and Tuesday coming up. But they've won 7 in a row. Most interesting part is they're top 10 in both defense and rebounding over that span. So really encouraging on the dirty work element side of things. That's when we talk about how the Suns were supposed to look like the 2021 Brooklyn Nets and they haven't. People forget that the 2021 Brooklyn Nets defended. They guarded. And that to me is it is a two-way perimeter skill game that ends up winning in the NBA, not just a one-way perimeter skill game, if that makes sense. Some impressive wins in that 7-game winning streak. They went into Los Angeles and smashed the Lakers. They went into New Orleans and won easily against the Pelicans. But they're really turning a corner when you zoom out. Bradley Beal's played 14 straight games. For all the talk about his health, he's been available for about a month now. They're 11-3 in those 14 games that Bradley Beal has played. They're basically won at a 53-win pace in games that Bradley Beal has been available. I think they're 13-7 in those games. Easily the most exciting part of all of this, though, is Devin Booker has gotten going. He started the season hot and then cooled off massively after that injury that he had. And just now in this last, month or so, he's starting to look like the Devin Booker from the playoffs last year. And that to me is, kind of a prerequisite to the Suns being a real threat. Because again, if Devin Booker is going to be what he was a few years ago, where he's kind of like a second tier star, I shouldn't even say second tier, almost like third tier star. Because to me, it's like there's the top guys, and then there's like the other superstars, and then there's the guys that are right below superstar. And like Devin Booker used to be in that tier, but recently he's been showing like throughout the regular season last year and in the playoffs last year, he's starting to show this like higher level. Like now he's like kind of like a tier B superstar, right? And like it's important for him to get to that level because so is Kevin Durant, and two of those guys just gives you a much better chance to win. I know, big shock. But Devin Booker getting going, I think, has played a big role. But they're definitely turning a corner, and we will talk more about them next week. Next question, Jason, would you give us a trade scenario on what the Lakers would have to give up to get Bruce Brown and Dejounte Murray? So Jovan Buha came on the show yesterday, and we aired the show today, but it came on the show yesterday, and we did like an hour on the Lakers trade deadline, and we did a bunch of scenarios surrounding Dejounte Murray and Bruce Brown and even some other guys. So make sure you check that out on our YouTube feed. Also, shout out to Jovan. He's been awesome for us, and we just signed him to be on the show twice a month through free agency this year. So for Lakers fans, basically once every other week, we're going to have 45 minutes or so with Jovan where we talk, not just reporting surrounding the trade deadline, but also like just intel coming from within the locker room. Jovan travels around with the team. Like he's like going to be with them on this Grammy road trip. He's going to be able to give us some insights of what's happening inside the locker room. And then obviously when we get outside of the playoffs, he's going to be big for us surrounding the draft and free agency. So shout out to Jovan, officially going to be a recurring guest on the Hoops Tonight show for the rest of this season. Next question. What is the value of screen setting in the NBA? I feel like one of the reasons for Dame's struggles can be because Giannis is not setting good enough screens for him like Nurkic used to do in Portland. I also feel like it affects Giannis because since the second defender doesn't have to step up as much, it clogs the paint for him. Do you think this is a reason why their pick and roll has not been as great as we thought? So here's the thing. I've watched so many Dame Giannis pick and rolls this year. And Giannis is not a good screener. It's not exactly surprising. He hasn't really had a ton of practice with it over the years, right? Like that was something that early on in 2019, 2020, 21, like he just wouldn't do all that much, right? And so there's a certain element of like kind of like learning how to do it. But at the end of the day, the coverage that is implemented in most cases against the Bucks kind of dictates whether or not a screen is as necessary. So first of all, is screening important in the NBA? Absolutely. It's most important in when it comes to pick and roll in a drop coverage. The main reason why is like just visualize it. So a drop coverage, the big man guarding the screener, if this is the basket, the big man guarding the screener is back further towards the basket, right? And then the on-ball defender is chasing over the top of the screen, right? So there's this gap there. And to give the offensive player an opportunity to work in that gap, you need to set a solid enough screen so that the offensive player can get over the top while dragging this guy behind so that he can operate in this mid-range to get to his wide open looks or maybe pull the drop coverage big up and make something good happen from there. So in that specific situation, like screen setting is vitally important. In blitzing situations and in hard hedges and shows and things like that, it's actually more important to make yourself available on the roll quicker. And so a lot of these times, like Giannis, he could set a better screen on Dame's man, but even if he did, like Dame's immediately running into the hedger or the screen defender, right? And so a lot of times, like Giannis is slipping out of the screen pretty quick. You'll watch just watch Dame Giannis pick and rolls, and you'll see like he runs over to screen the guy, and he's immediately bailing out of it into the short roll, which he's just trying to make himself available for the pass as quickly as possible as Dame is facing a second defender. The second part of it is icing. So an ice coverage is a pick and roll coverage that you typically see on the sides of the floor. And so imagine Dame on the basket's here, like I said, and here's your arc, right? And Dame is on the right wing and Giannis comes up to set a ball screen. A lot of times what teams will do is ice those side pick and rolls, meaning the guy guarding Dame will jump high side and basically stand between Dame and the screen and not allow him to use it. And so at that point, same exact sort of thing. Dame's job there is to quickly reject the screen, meaning drive away from the screen, which will then allow him to quickly engage the screen defender. And then as the on-ball guy is now chasing him as he's rejecting the screen, Giannis has an opening in that gap created by the ice coverage. So once again, it's more important for him to slip out of it as quickly as possible. And so again, do I think Giannis is a fantastic screener? No. But I think specifically with a lot of the coverages that Milwaukee is facing, it's more important for Giannis and Dame to kind of figure out the angles for slipping and how to get the ball to him quickly and in space where he can see the floor and make quick reads, whether or not he has an opportunity to drive or to quickly make a pass. Great question, though. Thought that was really interesting. Two more. What is the next step for Philly? Go for depth or another all-star talent, assuming Joel can figure it out in the playoffs and Maxey will be effective. So those are two big ifs. If Joel can figure it out in the playoffs and if Tyrese Maxey can be effective. To me, I look at it like this. Like, who are the other two best kind of like front court fulcrums, right? I should say three best, right? It's Anthony Davis, it's Giannis Antetokounmpo, it's Nikola Jokic. What do those guys have? Like, Anthony Davis has LeBron James and Austin Reeves and D'Angelo Russell. So he's got all of this offensive skill around him to kind of set him up in spots, right? Nikola Jokic is one of the best shot makers in the NBA. The guy, one of the best guys at making tough pull-up, step-back, ISO, pick-and-roll jump shots, right? And so that basically puts their two-man game in a very in a position where it's very difficult to guard. And specifically, the reason why I bring those guys up is it translates to the postseason. And so here's the thing. If Tyrese Maxey can bring the same level of volume and efficiency to the playoffs this year that he does in the regular season, then yeah, that's great. And now it's like, I've seen a lot of rumors surrounding Bruce Brown to the Sixers basically as an, I don't know, I guess you're looking at him as an upgrade of that 2 spot, right? With where DeAnthony Melton is. But to me, that only works or makes sense if Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey can do what you said, which is reach their regular season impact in the postseason. But last year, as a secondary offensive initiator off of James Harden, catching the second best perimeter defender, Tyrese Maxey went down 6% in true shooting percentage from regular season to the postseason. And so that's where it gets complicated. And that's where you have to have tough conversations because Joel Embiid is still relatively young, but he's got an injury history and he's huge. And so, I don't think he's one of those guys necessarily that you can. I'm not saying he can't, but there's some risk involved as it pertains to can Joel Embiid still be at a superstar level when he's 33, right? So there's a little more urgency surrounding Joel, and so there are tough conversations for Daryl Morey to have with his front office about is Tyrese Maxey good enough as a young guard to be the number 2 next to Joel Embiid, the same way that Jamal Murray is for Nikola Jokic, the same way that LeBron James and Austin Reeves is for Anthony Davis, the same way that Damian Lillard is for Giannis Antetokounmpo, right? And so that's where it gets complicated because that's why I actually pitched Philly as an interesting team for a Dejounte Murray trade. Because now you just have a lot more offensive skill in your backcourt. Another guy who can consistently beat people off the dribble and get the defense into rotation. To me, that's more of an offensive-minded upgrade of that 2 spot. But at the end of the day, who's the all-star guy you'd be going after? I mean, maybe you go all in for a Lauri Markkanen and you add a lot of shooting and size into that front court. That's the thing is I'm not necessarily sure that there's that type of all-in move available. But from a philosophical standpoint, it's just important for Daryl Morey in the front office to have a conversation about the timeline of Tyrese Maxey's rise as it pertains to Joel Anthony and his prime and how. Or I keep saying Joel Anthony. Joel Embiid and his Joel. Shout out Joel Anthony on the Miami Heat back in the early 2010s. But it's just kind of weighing that timeline there. And you guys know how I feel about trusting young players in the playoffs, but that's for the Sixers to decide. Lastly, before we get out of here, have you been talked to by a player that you have covered? If so, how was it? So yes, I have. And it has been overwhelmingly positive. I've seen examples of players really going after members of the media. That to this point hasn't happened to me yet. It's been pleasant. People forget, I've spent my young adulthood around the game of basketball. So I've talked to lots of NBA players. I've played with lots of NBA players. Like there are guys all over the league that I've played in games with before. So like for me, it just kind of feels somewhat natural just because I've had those kinds of conversations before. But I will say it's surreal from the standpoint of it being just kind of a sign of the show gaining some legitimacy, which is obviously something that I don't take for granted. But at the same time, like I know that there's an ugly side to that too, and I'm sure it will eventually happen that I'll say something about a player and then they'll come after me. But that's just kind of the name of the game, right? One of the things that I'm most interested in if I ever do player interviews in the future is picking players' brains about the media-player relationship, because I think it's super fascinating. Like I know I do the work. Like I know I study the film. I know that I don't just come up here and talk for the sake of talking. But at the same time, like I'm not an NBA player. And even though I have a basketball background, and even though I have played, and even though I think I'm a good basketball player, I'm not an NBA player. And so like, imagine the roles were reversed and I'm an NBA player and this dude who played in college but didn't make it to the NBA is like, you know, sitting in his guest bedroom talking shit. You know, like I'd be like, what the hell, dude? You know, like, so like, I do find that dynamic super interesting because on one hand, it's like, that's my job. My job is to not just come up here and praise players, but to offer criticism. Like I try to be like incredible. I try to just be fair as much as I can. But at the same time, like there's a certain like respect barrier as it pertains to the NBA. And like, I just have so much respect for NBA players and what they accomplish. And like, I just think it's fascinating. And I would love to pick players' brains about that in the future, just specifically the relationship between players and the media. But yeah, I have talked to NBA players since I started the show. It went well. Obviously, to respect those players' privacy, I won't mention anybody by name.